TechCast. With me, I have Marnie Wilking. Marnie is the Global Head of Security and Technology Risk Management at Wayfair. Welcome, Marnie.
Thank you for having me, Ashwin. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk about something as we were doing this discussion before we hit record, is when, at least for me, when I think about retail and I think about security, one of the first things that jumps to mind is the Target HVAC attack that happened almost, 7-8 years ago right now. Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about, clearly that put a lot of focus on retail and the impact it can have. But again, fast forward to today, where predominantly I think things are not just e-commerce today, but maybe that's going to stay that way for a while, right? So how have things evolved from what happened at Target 7+ years ago to where things are right now?
Yeah, I think that shook up a lot of folks, especially cybersecurity professionals in all sorts of industries, because it really highlighted issues with the supply chain. Mm-hmm. I'll talk a little bit about what hasn't changed, and then I'll talk a little bit about what definitely has changed. So, that breach was perpetrated through a phishing attack against one of their vendors. Mm-hmm. That hasn't changed. Phishing is still the primary vector. And over the course of the last 6-7 months during COVID, it's definitely become a more pervasive issue. Hackers wasted no time taking advantage of the pandemic situation to start sending scams and phishing and malware and ransomware. So that definitely hasn't changed. So teaching your staff about phishing, making sure that you're doing phishing training on a regular basis. And I know in talking with some other folks, I know that's hard to hear right now, and people don't like to put extra pressure mm-hmm. on their employees, especially when everybody's a little stressed out from working from home. And, maybe they're feeling like, well, we don't want to add to their plates.
Yep.
But now it's even more important. People are working from home. People are often, maybe checking personal emails. That training extends into their personal lives as well, and they'll remember those tips. And studies show that doing regular training with your employees definitely makes a difference and reduces the click rate. One interesting statistic that has come up recently is that younger people who are new to the workforce are about anywhere from 5 to 7 times more likely to click on a phishing link. They're new to the workforce. There's not a lot of phishing training going on at universities. And so they're just not used to seeing it as much. So training your workforce really makes a big difference. And especially for if you've got a younger tech engineering heavy workforce, making sure that they get that training on a regular basis is really important. The need for two-factor has definitely not changed. Right? So making sure that your privileged accounts have two-factor. And in fact, doing phishing training against the two-factor is a good thing to do occasionally as well. Actually sending out signals just to remind people that if they get a signal to log on and they haven't just done something, that might also be a phishing attempt or somebody's stolen their credentials, and that they should be really mindful of that and report it when it happens. But again, having two-factor would have helped in at least one of the steps that the Target attack took. So making sure, again, privileged accounts, domain accounts, and training people against that 2FA. And especially now, people have become the perimeter, right? So identity is the more important. Patching, that has not changed in the 20 years I've been doing this. Patch stuff. A lot of people focus on external, which is the right thing to do. But if you have a phishing attack and somebody gets in, then you do have potential issues with people finding vulnerabilities in your internal network. So ensure you know where your important data is, where your high value target might be, and make sure that it's patched and that there's two-factor authentication.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack there, but it's so true. I mean, like you mentioned, some things have not changed, and everything from patching to 2FA. But if you were to kind of push the envelope a little bit further, right? For instance, the in-store experience is now all virtual, right?
Mhm.
So if I go to Amazon, even though I'm a privacy geek, I do like to see the fact that it's tailored to what my thought process is, whether it's Amazon Prime, whether it's my past purchases. So how does the role of a CISO now kind of blend into privacy and transparency, right? Because there is a lot of data collection, for rightfully so, that needs to happen so that users or consumers are given the right choices. But at the same time, how do you ensure that the average person, you mentioned people coming into the workforce the first time, there might also be people who are newbies to e-commerce, right? Whether it's cookies, whether it's using the right browser, I mean, there's so many things that you and I take for granted, right? How do you kind of extend that into the e-commerce environment?
Yeah, you're right. And e-commerce is collecting more and more information so that they can personalize the experience, which is, again, like you said, what people actually appreciate about going in. I don't want advertisements for products that have nothing to do with anything that I've looked at before or might be interested in. So I think it's really, really important for CISOs to have good, strong relationships with data privacy officer, with legal counsel, with head of marketing. Business partners in general are important to reach out to from a strategy standpoint. I spend a lot of time meeting with my business counterparts to understand what are they trying to accomplish, what new things do they have on the horizon, and how can I help them make sure that they can continue doing the things they need to do, but that we're doing it within a secure sphere, and that, you know, we're working with the privacy officer and bringing them in when we need to, and talking with legal counsel and getting opinions from outside counsel when necessary. There's a very wide spectrum of what the requirements look like right now. GDPR has some specific things, but there's still some room for interpretation, and the same thing with CCPA. And so, you know, there's a desire to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the customer. And really, at the end of the day, the requirements for both of those pieces of legislation are to give customers agency over the information that we've collected about them. So if you can say that you're doing that as a company, and again, you know, working closely with the legal and privacy and marketing teams, then you've gotten a pretty far distance in actually achieving compliance with those legislation.
Great. So one final lightning round question, right? And we won't have time to kind of deep dive into this. We'll come back a later time for this. But if there was one thing that you look for in a new hire today in your team versus 10 years ago, what's that one quality that is top of mind today that may not have been top of mind, let's say 10, 15 years ago?
That's a really great question. I can't think of anything that's really that different between now and then, because honestly, the thing that I like to have on my team is curiosity and critical thinking. The technical skills are important to have as well. You know, having a background in security is great. It may not be necessary depending on what job you're looking for, but regardless of what your function is, you need to have some amount of curiosity and critical thinking. The critical thinking goes to, you know, understanding what people are actually asking for. One of the best things I got out of my consulting career was when people come and say, I need this, actually being able to dig in and say, well, what outcome are you actually trying to get to? Because that might be a different solution than the thing that you're actually asking for. And so I really encourage my team to, regardless of what somebody's asking for or suggesting, rather than reacting and saying, oh my gosh, why would we ever do that? Or that's crazy. Or even, oh, I can hurry up and check the box and just do that. Lean in a little bit and say, tell me more about what you're trying to do, and actually ask the why a few times to get down to the bottom. And that will show that you are willing to be an effective partner. It also shows that you're willing to really dig in and understand the problem. And that critical thinking and curiosity will likely get you to a better solution together than you were trying to get to by just quickly checking a box or saying no.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think those five whys, right? You got to get to that. Okay. Well, what are you actually looking for? So great conversation again. Thanks for joining me, Mani.
Thank you, Ashwin. I had fun.